So let me just tell you a little bit how this forum came together. My name is Pat Fry, and many of you know me as a longtime labor activist and solidarity activist with Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and active in the peace movement. I just wanted to thank everybody who co-sponsored this event, a whole number of organizations that agreed to co-sponsor. This is really a part of building a movement to counter U.S. intervention in Latin America. Around the world, but we're focusing tonight on Latin America. And the idea for this forum came together last April, actually, a year ago April, after the events unfolded of what became clear to us as an attempted coup d'etat in Nicaragua. And the stark contrast between what was happening in Nicaragua and what was being presented in the media was so outrageous and continues to be. So we wanted to do a forum that kind of gets out on the table what happened in Nicaragua, and then not too long after last April, then the Trump administration began moving very, very, very sharply to intervene in Venezuela with another coup attempt that they orchestrated this past April. I was on a delegation in Venezuela when that happened, along with Ann, and there's several other people here that were on that delegation, so we want to talk about that. And then this month, just this month, more outrageous tightening of the embargo and the blockade of Cuba, and taking away or reimposing the travel restrictions on Cuba against us and our ability to travel there. So we're going to put all that together, and I'm going to call now on the person that's going to lead us through this evening, Estela Vasquez. Estela is a longtime leader of 1199 SEIU and a longtime activist in our movement. So take it away.
Good evening, buenas noches familia. Good evening, comrades in the struggle. I don't know if any of you follow the news, but I want to give you a very brief historical reference. Some time ago, around 1823, at the height of the struggles in the continent for liberation, for freedom against the European colonialism, the United States came up with the so-called Monroe Doctrine. And supposedly, the doctrine was to oppose European intervention in Latin America and the Caribbean. Actually, what the Monroe Doctrine was and continues to be was the U.S. justification to create their own backyard where they could use gunboat diplomacy against our people. I don't know how many of you are aware that earlier, a few months ago, Mr. Bolton said in an interview that the Trump administration was not afraid to use the word Monroe Doctrine. So we are here tonight to deliver a message to Trump, to Bolton, to Elliott, and all the other killers in that administration, that neither are the people of Latin America afraid to use the word resistance and fight back against the Monroe Doctrine. And the Sisters of Legacy had a song, and I think it's more than just fire. I think what the message of the song is, you want to fight? By hell, we will give you one, fight back. And that's what Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba are doing and will continue to do with our support and our internationalism. And I just want to, before I introduce the first speaker, quote a African revolutionary. His name was Amilcar Cabral. One of the quotes of Amilcar, at least my favorite one, was that solidarity is not an act of charity. Solidarity is an act of defense of mutual interest. And it is in the interest of the poor, the working class people, and the people of color inside this country, the workers inside here, to defend Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, because when we defend them, we're defending ourselves, our rights, and our interests. It is a great pleasure to introduce our sister, a member, she's a retired public interest attorney who represented New York City workers in housing court and in other matters. She's a longtime community peace activist and organizer, and she is currently on the board of Brooklyn for Peace, a member of Peace Action Bay Ridge, and she's involved with issues affecting the Bay Ridge Muslim community. Ann Fawcett Ambia is a member of the delegation, of a recent delegation that went to Venezuela from April 26th to May 5th, and she will be giving us a report on some of the aspects of the experience during that memorable trip. Ann, please.
Yes, I decided at the last minute to go to Venezuela with my partner, finding out about the trip about a week and a half before we left. And I thought, great, I'll actually be in a socialist country for May Day. Little did I know that we were going to be there for a fake coup attempt on April 30th. Dan has given you the background. This is not the first time that there's been a coup attempt orchestrated by the United States against the Bolivarian government. However, I'm going to just give you a little bit of information about our experience. Behind you, you see pictures of the members of the delegation. We were 1 Canadian and 7 Americans. 5 of us, including me, are here if you want to stand up so that people can come ask you questions afterwards. So Dan mentioned Maduro. Nicolas Maduro was vice president under Chavez. In the last election, under impeccable election conditions, he was elected by 62% of the vote. Who is the big contender, allegedly, for president now? Juan Guaido, who before he declared himself president in January, was a mid-level official in the opposition-dominated National Assembly. He was the speaker because it was his turn, not because he was elected to that position. He is someone who's been handpicked and trained by the CIA and other US government forces. He was a key participant, in fact, in the Generation 2007 anti-government demonstrations, and co-founded an organization called Popular Will with Leopoldo Lopez, the infamous, who engaged in the violent street crimes known as guarimbas in 2014 and 2017, for which Leopoldo Lopez was under house arrest before he walked out on April 30th to join Juan Guaido in Juan Guaido's claim that April 30th was the day when the opposition was going to take over Venezuela. So, what happened on April 30th? Well, at 6:30 in the morning, we woke up in our hotel room to hear the sound of people banging on pots and whistles being blown and pops, loud pops that some people thought were big firecrackers and other people thought was gunfire. We couldn't see anything. Looking out the window, people were just walking around on the street as normal. Kids were going to school. People looked like they were going to work. There wasn't any gathering of anybody. One of us saw a person out on a fire escape banging a pot, and when they didn't get any response, they went back inside. We went in our bus to go to Hotel COUP, where we were attending a housing conference that was the 8th anniversary of the grand housing mission of Venezuela, 8th anniversary. Clearly, if there was a coup going on, the housing conference would not have been going on as scheduled. So after a short time of sitting in the conference, my partner and I began wondering what was going on outside. So we went out to the lobby and asked them to put the news on television. And we went back and forth between CNN and Telesur. Interestingly enough, Both views were being broadcast simultaneously, another clear indication that no coup was going on because no television, radio station, newspaper, or anything else had been taken over by anybody. So we heard that at 6 o'clock in the morning, Juan Guaido had claimed that today was the day for the opposition to take over the country, and that he had taken over the Carlotta Air Force Base, and the military was standing behind him. There were all kinds of allegations being made by Bolton that Maduro was terrified and had a plane ready to flee to Cuba. Pompeo had claimed that there were all these high-ranking officials who'd agreed to remove Maduro from office, including, and he named Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino as one of them. In the meantime, we're looking at Telesur, and we can see that Juan Guaido and Leopoldo Lopez are not in Carlotta Air Force Base, but in fact across the street, standing on top of a car. I'd like to show you some, this is our housing anniversary. I clearly forgot to move this forward. Here we have a picture of Guaido and Lopez standing on top of a car, claiming that they had the full force of the military and millions of people in Venezuela standing behind them. What was really going on, however, was that there was, in the neighborhood of Altamira, which is the white, rich neighborhood of Caracas, and which is Guaido's base, there were some street scenes going on that were reminiscent of the guarimbas of 2014 and 2017, as you can see in these pictures. There were some people standing on an overpass who were making Molotov cocktails and throwing them. There was a bus, at least one bus that was burned. And we'd switch over to watching CNN. This is a photograph that was actually taken of what was on the screen. You can see Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino affirming his loyalty to Maduro, despite Bolton's claims that he had defected. And the armed forces was also on Telesur, affirming their support for Maduro. This was a scene from the television that as we were watching it, of the people who had become violent, who were making Molotov cocktails and throwing them. So while they were doing this, and there were these scattered instances, all of which took place in this neighborhood of Altamira, thousands of people started marching into Miraflores, which is where the presidential palace was, to affirm their support for President Maduro. And these are some photos that you can see of the thousands of people who just showed up on that day. And before the end of the day, this is just a photograph, but I actually saw the footage on television of thousands of soldiers standing around President Maduro, claiming their support for him. So what we did here at the end of the day was that, while Guaido was still claiming to have been successful, he was going into hiding, as did Leopoldo Lopez, as did about 100 military defectors, while the rest of the people were, standing firm with the military. There was no major defection, there was no coup. And the next day, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people poured into the streets in support of President Maduro. Largely, it was one of the biggest demonstrations that Venezuela has seen. And a lot of it was exactly because of the ridiculous coup attempt the day before, and the fact that people wanted to make it very clear that they stood behind the Bolivarian Revolution and President Maduro. This is a street that we were walking down, a feeder street, just to get down to the area where the stage was, where Maduro was going to be speaking. And after we went through security clearance, we were up on a stand on the side of the grandstand that President Maduro was going to be speaking on, so we had a view looking down at the audience. When President Maduro came out, this is the reaction that he got. And we heard that there were 400,000 Chavistas who arrived in Miraflores that day, walking from all over, not just from Caracas, but from neighborhoods all over. People had started marching at 10 o'clock in the morning. At 5 o'clock at night, people were still arriving. This was, again, the view that we could see from the grandstand, where a crowd counter among us said that this was about 40,000 people that you could see from the stage, that just the area where we were. So, what happened after that is that we started going, we were planning to leave Caracas, but because of this coup attempt, the government decided for our safekeeping that we should stay in the Caracas area. So I just want to show you some street scene shots that we took that show what life looks like in Caracas on the weekends. And all of these shots here are in the neighborhood around our hotel. Now this is walking over towards Simón Bolívar Plaza on the weekend, again, where you can see all kinds of activities going on for children, street theater. This is an actual open meeting. Oh yes, this is such a repressive government that you have an example here of an open community meeting where we actually heard people talking about why there was a shortage of medicines in Caracas, because in 2 minutes, the newspapers, good grief, the newspapers are, there are several different kinds of newspapers, and they're not all in support of the Bolivarian Revolution. This is what happens in the evening on the weekends in Simón Bolívar Plaza. So what I'd like to talk about as fast as I can is that we learned at the conference that in the Venezuelan constitution, people actually have a right to housing, a right to education, a right to health care, a right to social services, and a right to jobs. And we went with the delegations from the housing conference to a community called Vargas, where in 2010, this photo that I took of the screen shows the complete devastation that happened in that neighborhood. And today you can see the housing built behind the crowd of people who came out to welcome us, where there's housing for 420,000 people. They have daycare centers, they have schools, healthcare. We went to this clinic, a diagnostic clinic in La Catia, where we found out that instead of troops from Cuba, actually there are doctors from Cuba who are assisting in training people. We went to a Fabricio Ojeda, which was a vegetable and rabbit and poultry farm, where we saw greenhouses where tomatoes, which don't naturally grow in the climate of Caracas, were growing, and where we met a Cuban agronomist who was teaching people how to grow food in the greenhouses. We also went to a place where the COUP food is being distributed. COUP is a program that was created by Chavez in 2016 to shield the most vulnerable sections of the population from hunger. And it's an acronym for the local committee for supply and production. It supplies about 6 million people with bags of food every 2 weeks that contain essential things like rice and flour, toothpaste, toilet paper, cooking oil, and these boxes or bags of food cost about a penny to the dollar for people to purchase. And here you can see us in the center. And one of the things, Dan already talked about sanctions, but one of the things that's happening, that the United States is doing now, is increasing the sanctions and talking about cutting the food that's being imported for the COUP program. Right now, only about 2 of 12 shipping companies are being allowed to bring products into port in Caracas. So, whereas the Venezuelans want to expand the program, the sanctions are, as we all know, they're economic warfare against the people. And who are the people who are going to be suffering? It's going to be the people who need to eat, the people who can't afford to survive without some kind of assistance. Now, what we did, this is the last day that we were in Venezuela, and I'm really happy to say that we took this action. We were in Simón Bolívar Plaza with our signs. We had a press release that we read, and we were actually interviewed on different kinds of media. But on this last day, we actually went into Bolivar Square with our signs, and immediately people from all around came, as they were everywhere we went, welcoming us, hugging us, encouraging us to come home and talk to people about what we saw, and telling us that the most important message we could bring home is that we as Americans, as North Americans, are the only ones who can stop the United States from continuing to try to smash the Bolivarian Revolution, which is an incredible society that's developing in South America.
Thank you very much, and gracias. And I would like to point out that apparently the rich white Venezuelans don't learn their lessons. They like coup d'etats or attempt of coup d'etats in April. The one against Cesar Chavez was on April 11 of 2002. And you know what? It ended up just like this one ended, with millions of Venezuelans taken to the street, the military standing with Chavez, and it took a few hours for Chavez to come back from the island where they have taken him back to Miraflores, where millions of Venezuela welcome him. And if you haven't seen the film, there was a film made by some Irish journalists that is titled "The Revolution Will Be Televised."
Will not be televised.
No, the song was "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." The film is "The Revolution Will Be Televised" because it was televised in that documentary. And the song is by, I'll remember the name of it. Also, Gil Scott Heron, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And you should listen to that song also. I would like to, before we open the floor for questions, I would like to ask Sister Jocelyn Velasquez and compañero Rogelio to please address the audience and say a few questions. Talk to us about what is going on in Puerto Rico, what you're doing here, how that solidarity needs to be expressed by workers in the U.S. with workers in Puerto Rico. Jocelyn.
Buenas noches a todas y a todos. Como les dijeron, mi nombre es Jocelyn Velázquez, soy portavoz de la jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas. Es un grupo que nos dedicamos, ¿verdad?, a denunciar la ley promesa y la Junta de Control Fiscal que fue impuesta por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Nos encontramos aquí en el marco de las vistas del caso de Puerto Rico en las Naciones Unidas. No sé si ustedes están conscientes de que a pesar de que la relación de Puerto Rico con los Estados Unidos es una colonial.
I'm Frank Vergara. I'm going to be translator for the compañera. She said that they represent the resistance movement in Puerto Rico. The name of the organization is Jornada Se Acabaron las Promesas. As Estela said earlier, when the Obama administration approved the Promesa bill, it established a fiscal control over Puerto Rico. The response in Puerto Rico to by a new generation of activists was to stop the first meeting of the Fiscal Control Board in Puerto Rico. Thousands of young people, old people mobilized and they shut down the meeting. That was followed by a series of demonstrations, confrontations, arrests. We now have another Puerto Rican political prisoner in this country, brought from Puerto Rico, Nina Droz, a young hip-hop artist with a lot of influence among the younger generation who was targeted and arrested. Jocelyn said, they are here. There's a delegation from Puerto Rico of that movement that will testify June 24th at the United Nations in the annual hearings of the Decolonization Committee on Puerto Rico. Many movements and parties and activists here testify every year on the situation in Puerto Rico.
Sí, me pidieron que explicara cómo estaban las cosas en Puerto Rico. Pues la ley promesa en estos momentos está siendo impugnada en el Tribunal Federal y los tribunales federales han determinado que es inconstitucional y le han exigido al presidente Donald Trump que nombre nuevamente a los integrantes de la Junta, porque la Junta es una estructura federal y no le pertenece al gobierno de los Estados Unidos.
Right now, the Fiscal Control Board is being challenged in the federal courts in Puerto Rico. It was declared unconstitutional. And therefore, it is being demanded by the courts that the Trump administration assign new members of the Fiscal Control Board.
A pesar de que las Cortes Federales han dicho que es inconstitucional, han planteado que todas sus decisiones son legales.
Even though they have declared the Fiscal Control Board unconstitutional, they simultaneously declared that all its decisions are constitutional. An oxymoron.
En estos momentos, la Junta se dispone a imponer lo que ellos llaman un plan de ajuste fiscal.
At this point, what the Fiscal Control Board is doing is developing a plan to impose fiscal control over the institutions of the island.
Ese plan implica el cierre de 300 escuelas.
This plan calls for the closing of 300 schools,
La reducción de un 10% en las pensiones de los trabajadores y las trabajadoras,
a reduction of 10% in the pensions of all workers,
la reducción en los servicios de salud
a reduction in all public health services,
y un acuerdo para la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica que aumentaría el costo de las facturas de luz hasta de un 30, 40 o un 50% dentro de 40 años.
and it's calling for the electrical authority to raise electrical bills 40 to 50% over the next 40 years.
A pesar de ese plan de ajuste fiscal, ellos aún no establecen cuáles son los servicios esenciales.
Even though that's a plan to impose fiscal austerity over the island, they don't establish what other provisions in order to provide services across the board.
Y se niegan a auditar la deuda.
Oh, and they refuse to audit the debt.
Nosotros hemos exigido que la deuda tiene que ser auditada porque no hay sentido en que nos impongan tantas medidas de austeridad mientras no nos explican quién gastó el dinero, por qué lo gastaron, para qué lo gastaron.
And we insist and demand that there has to be an audit of the debt, because there has to be an explanation of what monies have been spent, how they've been used, and who've taken control of those funds.
Así que pues ese es el trabajo que hemos estado haciendo los pasados años, denunciando que Wall Street y estas grandes corporaciones se lucraron de las arcas de nuestro país, ahora lo quebraron y quieren obligarnos a pagar una deuda ilegal, imperial, y que nos está arrastrando a la miseria.
So this is the work we have been doing over the last couple of years, denouncing these measures of austerity over all sectors of the economy.
Así que queríamos también aprovechar el espacio, ¿verdad?, para invitarlos al foro de Prolibertad, que va a hablar sobre Cuba, Venezuela y Puerto Rico. Va a ser mañana a las 7 de la noche aquí en el People Forum, y quisiera, ¿verdad?, que nos acompañaran.
And we want to take this opportunity to invite you to the forum that's going to take place here tomorrow night at 7 around Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Puerto Rico, which we'll be speaking at right here at 7 p.m. tomorrow, which is sponsored by the Pro Libertad Freedom Campaign.
Nada, por último, cuando hablamos de las intervenciones norteamericanas y del imperialismo yanqui, no podemos descartar el tema de Puerto Rico. Es parte de la gran deuda que tiene el gobierno norteamericano con el Caribe y con Centro y Suramérica.
And when we speak of U.S. imperialist interventions in Latin America, we cannot do so without speaking about Puerto Rico, who is an intimate part of U.S. interventions into Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a ti, Jocelyn, and thank you very much, Frank, for your translation. And before we continue, I want also to recognize our brother, one of the leaders of the Solidarity Community with Venezuela, William Camacaro. William, bienvenido. William will be taking a delegation to Venezuela this year, August 19 to the 28th, Please see him after the end of the event if you're interested. And also, I have to recognize that I made a boo-boo. I made a mistake. The title of the movie, thank you for the correction, William, is The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. If you have not seen the movie, please, I urge you to watch the film, because it's an early play of what the United States tried to do, and the Venezuelan people stopped it. I also want to mention that we have members of the COUP organization, which very courageously were in the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., trying to stop defending the right of the Venezuelan building, and the police intervened.
Please welcome the Legacy Women. They're a very special musical group. They're rooted in Afro-Dominican and Afro-Puerto Rican traditions. They are some of the New York City's most gifted drummers, singers, dancers of Afro-Caribbean music.
We are honored to be here, sharing bomba. This is Afro-Boricua music, and it's music of resistance. So yeah, que viva Venezuela libre, Puerto Rico libre, Cuba libre, todos los pueblos libres. Congo libre no espera más, hoy ya cogemos la libertad. Congo libre no aguanta más,
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy coge su dignidad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, mujer libre no aguanta más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Coge la tierra indígena.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ella es pa' todo y pa' todo da.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ahí siento las islas, hay una fermina.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oye, guerrillera, tú eres de la mía.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Siento las islas, hay una Carlota.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oye, Lucumí, orgullo tu raíz.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, Congo libre no espera más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, Congo libre no aguanta más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oh, nacimos pa' sin cadenas.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Y nacimos pa' ser esclavizar.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, mujer libre no aguanta más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy Lolita tira su bala.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
No hay ser humano que es ilegal.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Siembra tu tierra indígena.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy coge nadie pa' la loma.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy cuyos alas y madronas.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, negro libre no espera más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, negra libre no aguanta más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Que la tierra pa' todo y pa' todo da.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oh, nacimos pa' ser dominadas.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Y yo nací pa' morir.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy Lolita tira su bala.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Están se pega su grito ya.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Abajo la fucking colonia ya.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
De mi pueblo quiero hablar en libertad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy coge su dignidad.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Hoy coge lenguas tierra ya.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, si por las islas hay una fermina.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oye, guerrillera, tú eres de la mía.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Y siendo las islas hay una Carlota.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oye, Lucumí, tengo orgullo en tu raíz.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Oh, Congo libre no aguanta más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
Ay, Congo libre no espera más.
Hoy ya cogemos la libertad.
No hay ser humano que es ilegal.
Hoy ya cogemos
Gracias. So yeah, we all come from long legacies of resisting and not giving our freedom away without a fight. And so we want to honor that legacy and allow that to continue.